Welcome to 100 Yards Football. Today is my college football legend. His name is Marcus Dupree. Out of Philadelphia, Mississippi, I'm your host, Mr. Football. Before I get started, the video today is presented by betonline.com and it's presented by the Bleed Podcast Network. One more time, the video is presented by betonline.com, presented by Bleed Podcast Network. Marcus Dupree, out of the great state of Mississippi. The royalty of Mississippi, where my parents have a lot of history. I got a lot of history in the state of Mississippi, and I always say something out of Mississippi is something special. Well, Marcus Dupree, if you had to say there was one football player that had all the potential to be the greatest that ever played this game on any level, whether it's high school, he proved that college, in the NFL was Marcus Dupree. And it's a shame that it didn't really work out for him because, man, he was phenomenal his freshman year at the University of Oklahoma. And the thing about Marcus Dupree, he came out of high school in 1982, the same year I graduated from college. And I remember who was the top-rated running backs that year in high school football. You had a young man named Roman Bates that came out of Memphis, Hamilton. He's deceased now, my hometown. He ended up going to Ohio State. You had Keith Byers, who's in that list. He ended up going to Ohio State. And you had Bo Jackson that went over to the University of Auburn. But all eyes was on that little small town in Philadelphia, Mississippi. And you got to know with Marcus Dupree how special he was. Because people, you really don't know how hard it is to get to Philadelphia, Mississippi. It's not like Atlanta. It's not like a LA. It's a town down in rural Mississippi, baby. And Marcus Dupree had every scout coming to that hometown. He had scouts from Texas and Oklahoma living in hotels for months leading up to his final year of high school football. And then he had the great Billy Sims, who had played at Oklahoma, from Hooks, Texas, showed up at his school. Do you know how powerful that is? For an athlete of that nature, Billy Sims, who had won the Heisman Trophy in 1978, with that wishbone of Oklahoma showing up, showing you that much love, that was special. But I'm going to talk about Marcus Dupree's skill set as a freshman at Oklahoma, coming out as the #1 football recruit in the nation, with books written about him. ESPN has did a 30-30 on him. His skill set, initial quickness, A+. The run instincts, A+. The vision, A+. The inside runner, A+. The power running, A+. The balance, A+. The outside running. He can run away from you, A+. The burst and acceleration, A+. And elusiveness, A+ at 6'2", 6'3", 230 pounds. Before he came on the scene, think about all the great running backs that came across the screen before Marcus Dupree, as you see him at the University of Oklahoma as a freshman. You had the cast on comment, Gale Sayers. You had the guy out of Morgan State, Leroy Kelly. You had the guy out of Galileo High School, O.J. Simpson. You had the guy out of Columbia, Mississippi, Jackson State finest, Walter Payton. You had the Tyler Rose, Earl Campbell. You had the guy out of Sealy, Texas, Eric Dickerson. You had the guy out of Lincoln High School in San Diego who changed from quarterback to fullback to tailback, and Marcus Allen. You had the great Willie Gallimore out of Florida A&M, Chicago Bears. And then you had the great St. Simons, Georgia, the Allen, Jim Brown, Syracuse University. But when he came on the scene at Oklahoma, I watched him playing 3 games. And I said, you know what? Because I didn't see him play in high school. I said, man, if this guy keeps his head right, he will be maybe the best that ever played, and pound for pound, the best football player ever. As a freshman in Oklahoma, I'm going to tell you how powerful he was. He went in preseason practice. There was problems that he didn't like the practice. But he was putting it on the first team defense that had Thomas Benson, not George Crumb, but Jackie Shipp, Scott Case, guys that played at the NFL. And you know what Barry Switzer done? He said, hey, I'm going to scrape my wishbone offense and go to the I formation because there's nobody else on this team that has the skill level. Now think about that. Oklahoma went from the wishbone to the I formation his freshman year. Stanley Wilson, who was an outstanding tailback in the wishbone, became his fullback, went on and played in the league. But think about the talent that came before him before they made that change. Buster Rhymes, Billy Sims Hooks, Texas, Evers Peacock, Stanley Wilson, David Overstreet, Big Sandy, Fred Nixon, Joe Washington Beaumont, Kenny King, Greg Pruitt. They went from that offense to Marcus Dupree. In his freshman year, he didn't start to the middle of the year. 1,144 yards, 13 touchdowns, 7.8 yards a carry, 16 touchdowns that year. With 13 touchdowns, 16 touchdowns in his career and 1,500 yards. Because the next year he left Oklahoma in the middle of the year. But think about who he put that on. See, I always go by the player in the competition. He caught my eye that year against the University of Texas. True freshman. Had that 64-yard run where he ran away from everybody. And that Texas defense had Mossy Cade, that was the first-round pick. June James, that was an excellent linebacker. Jerry Gray, who played with the Rams, a safety in the league. And Ed Williams, an outstanding defensive tackle. Then Nebraska, national television game, Thanksgiving in 82. He put 200 on them. Toby Williams, Neil Harris, Brent Clark, part of that Nebraska defense that was rated good that year. Then in the Fiesta Bowl, Brian Gumble doing the post-game, pre-game. Charlie Jones, who's a great announcer, announcing the game. And the Arizona State defense, it was rated as one of the tops coming out of the Pac-8 that year, Pac-10. And think about the players they had on their defense. Jim Jeffcoat, who went on with the Dallas Cowboys. Vernon Maxwell went on with the Baltimore Colts and Indianapolis Colts at the time. And Mike Richardson, who ended up being a starting cornerback on that 1985 Chicago Bears team. And Marcus Dupree had like 12 carries for like 200-some yards and was out of shape because he kept having hamstring problems. Almost 30 pounds overweight. He was doing this at 255. Go look on YouTube if you think I'm telling a story. And I said, if that young man stays anywhere focused, he gonna be, man, the best that ever done it. And he went to the school where he was doing it at the highest level. They changed the offense for him. Think about who came before him one more time. Busta Rhymes, Billy Sims, Elvis Peacock, Stanley Wilson, David Overstreet, Fred Nixon, Joe Washington, Kenny King, Craig Pruitt, and Stanley Wilson. They changed the offense for him. But the thing that happened the next year, Texas game, he took a hard hit, concussion. Oklahoma got upset there early in the year. I think that's what changed about Ohio State. He didn't have a good game. Started listening to stories back home in Mississippi. And this is why, if any big-time athlete is watching this on a high school level, it's a saying that we have, me and my business partner, Rodney Keebler, 100 Yards Football. Make sure you keep your posse or your company very minimal. And you got to be able to trust people. And Marcus Dupree ended up trusting the wrong people. Left school, ended up going to USFL, got paid a little bit, ended up tearing his knee with the New Orleans Breakers. Went into depression, the league folded. Made it back to the National Football League with the LA Rams for a year or two, but he wasn't the same football player. But think about if he would have just been mature enough and had the right people in his life who really could give him the great direction and advice to be the young man he could have been and playing this game. There's no doubt in my mind and in my heart, he would have been the best that ever played. His skill level was unreal. Go back and watch the game for him. And there's been a lot of great players that's played at the NFL level, college level, at the running back position. Herschel Walker one more time, Gale Sayers, Leroy Kelly, O.J. Simpson, Walter Payton, Eric Dickerson, Marcus Allen, Jim Brown, Willie Gallimore, Barry Sanders, Emmitt Smith. You can even throw Derrick Henry in there if you want to. But it was nobody that made it look easy than Marcus Dupree when he was running that ball as a true freshman in Oklahoma. And how fitting. We having this video on the week of Super Bowl 56, the Rams and Bengals. And who's starting at running back for the Cincinnati Bengals? Joe Mixon. University of Oklahoma. Boomer Sooner. It's a shame, man. Marcus Dupree was something special. One more time, 1982, the running back class. You had Bo Jackson, you had Keith Byers, you had Roman Bates. But he was at the top of the list. And he had schools like Texas and Oklahoma camping out with assistant coaches living in motels down there in Philadelphia, Mississippi to get his services. And it took Billy Sims as a pro with the Detroit Lions to come to Philadelphia, Mississippi and show up in this weight room. And one more thing before I leave this out. The year he started, like I said, I mentioned the teams he put some on, which was Missouri over 200, Texas 100, I want to say 70, Nebraska 2-something. The Missouri game is the one game that sticks out most of all about his career. And we even had the great Scott Case, was with me and Bobby Butler on the video we did with Mr. Case, who's one of the best high-hitting safeties in the National Football League. And he was a senior when Marcus Dupree stepped on campus. He might have been a junior senior. And he says this one game, if you want to know about Marcus Dupree, Missouri had a free safety. I think the guy was Jeff Smith. I'm not for sure, but I got to do a little more research. But the guy was the Big 8 sprint champion at 100 meters that season. had won the Big 8 championship twice, the free safety from Missouri. And he was like a 4-3 guy. 4-3 guy in the 40. Marcus Dupree broke in the open. The guy had an angle on him. 2-time Big 8 sprint champion, the free safety from Missouri. And Marcus Dupree stepped away from him. That and him rushing for 200-something yards, I want to say 227 in the Fiesta Bowl against the Arizona State team that had 3 players that played at a high level in the National Football League: Jeff Jeffcoat, Mike Richardson, Vernon Maxwell, and they also had Rod Brown, who's an Olympic sprinter on the offensive side. But Marcus Dupree didn't even play the whole game because of hamstring problems. Ended up being the best player on the field. To all you athletes out there, middle school, high school, please realize that to be great, you got to be mature, you got to listen, but you got to work. And you got to be mature enough to handle the accolades. Marcus Dupree, unfortunately, that happened to him. But in my mind, kept his head together, he could have been the best running back of any time. And that includes Eric Dickerson. Let me throw him on the list. He was that special, man. Man, he was special his freshman year at Oklahoma. He had you coming out of the seats and drinking that cognac and eating that good food out of the state of Mississippi. Morgan Freeman, James Earl Jones, Archie Manning, Brent Favre, Jerry Rice, Steve McNair, Walter Payton, some in the water in Mississippi, I told y'all. Final words. Special thanks to my producer, Mr. Logan Landers. If you like the video, please comment and share it. And special thanks. And please go to betonline.com, presented by you by Bleed Podcast Network. betonline.com, presented by Bleed Podcast Network. My final words about Marcus Dupree. Man, I hope you come across this video one day, because when I saw you as a young 18-year-old Oklahoma, all I could say was Boomer Sooner. And all I could say, who's that private football player running that football? Just like my man, Isaac Hayes. Who's that private eye? That's that sex machine to all those chicks. Well, Marcus Dupree, he was that black private eye that was running that football up there in Norman, Oklahoma. Boomer Sooner. Marcus Dupree, man, I still love you and still respect your game, man. And you still, in my opinion, is one of the best running backs I've seen in my lifetime. I still, based on your work, I still give you top 10 status. Thank you. And enjoy Super Bowl 56 this week. And thank you for watching 100 Yards Football. I'm Vincent Turner, Marcus Dupree.